Hey everybody, Todd here, and welcome back to another Wellness Talks Brief. Today I'm going to be answering a question that I have received from a member on Patreon, the page that helps support some of the work that I'm doing here and helps fund some of the folks that I work with who can't pay for services. So if you haven't checked that out, please be sure to follow the link below, and if you want to help out with this project, by all means, please do. But the question is basically, hey Todd, is there any way to stop expecting the worst? It seems like no matter what I'm facing, I always end up going into it thinking that the worst possible outcome is going to happen. How can we stop this? So stick around as I walk through this particular phenomena, where it comes from, and what you can do to begin to give yourself some distance from that and find a way to engage in it, even if it's a difficult experience. How do you stop expecting the worst? Short answer, you don't. No, but seriously, it isn't possible. Life circumstances happen. And the system that you're dealing with, this reactionary mind, this thinking mind, is dealing with what it's always been dealing with, the unexpected, the probable, the high likelihood that something is going to happen, the probability factor, the prediction. It's what that thinking mind does best. It starts to formulate things. In a way, it's kind of priming you to be ready to fight, flight, or freeze, to be able to handle the situation as it comes up. We generally want that on, especially when we're in a situation where things aren't stable. Think driving in a car and there's an accident up front, or something runs out in front of you, or there's a fire and it's approaching the town, or your bank account is getting too low, or you're stressed out because you don't think you're ready for that test. All of these things prime us to start to watch for the negatives. Now, I've talked about this before. One way you can sum this up is just to think about the number one job of that mind of yours, that thinking mind, is to solve problems and to keep us alive. And just really wrapping our heads around this concept helps us to develop a certain level of acceptance for this is what is so. And it's a really old process that we've had for a couple 100,000 years, evolved and developed slowly over time. It's part of the reason the success of our species. So to think that we'd be able to just drop that component, because if you think about it too, the mind is constantly scanning for a threat. It's constantly looking for things that may get in the way of your physical safety, your mental health, your emotional well-being. It's constantly looking for those things that may negatively impact your life. In other words, it really doesn't care about all the good stuff, which is partly why we have to put certain practices in place, mindfulness and gratitude practices, to help to counterbalance that, to keep us so that instead of being over here highly pessimistic and highly critical and constantly on the lookout for things that may go wrong, I want to make sure I'm balancing out the day by bringing things into play, like I'm grateful that I have a good house, that I have good health, that I have a decent bank account, that I have a nice job, that I have good friends. All these things, so we can just bring everything back up and try to balance it out. Although ultimately the mind, the thinking mind, is gonna just keep pushing it back in the other direction. The other wild thing is that after a while, if I don't take the time to look at some of the positives in my life, so let's just say I do this at day one, and then my negativity is here, so we're equal. But then the next day I don't pay attention to this, it drops a notch, but my negativity stays the same. And then it drops a notch, my negativity stays the same. Then it drops a notch, my negativity stays the same. And over time you can see how this becomes out of proportion, and it begins to feel like you're only expecting the worst. So one of the things that we can do then to counteract that is to begin to put some of the positives back in. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm actually suggesting that we only focus on the positive. If you see one of my other videos, that would be an escape, avoid, control strategy. And in the long run, that's not going to work for us very well either. That thinking mind, that scanning mind, reactive mind has kept you relatively free of harm. So we don't want to just completely ignore that side and have all rose-colored glasses and rainbows and unicorns as we focus only over on here. And then we get upset if this shows up in our, which is a common problem, overemphasizing the positive over everything else. What I'm asking you to do then is to actually look at the whole human experience and then just try to keep a balance of those two things. So we have to recognize that the focusing on and expecting the worst is, well, it's a normal function of a healthy thinking brain. But we can get a little bit too caught up in that if we're not doing something to balance it out. So gratitude practice, which you can find right here. Done a couple videos on that as well. Or just take time to go for a nice walk in the woods and be present and be mindful and just notice what's currently happening in the present moment. Because as I've talked about when it comes to time orientations, which you can find here, we have a natural tendency of either looking to the past or worrying about the future, and there is our depression and our anxiety all summed up in one. So, to my friend on Patreon, thanks for the question. It was a great conversation to put out there for you. I hope that the rest of you that are watching this liked it, found it to be useful. If you did like it, please be sure to hit the button below. And of course, you can always follow me if you'd like more interactions like this as well. And of course, until the next time, may you be well.